Chapter 33. The Heifer Baby, late 1920s. Highlander, Scottish redhead. The Highlander was covered with freckles. Riley Harness was living and farming on Bear Creek with his father, Billy Harness, up until 1927 when he took his wife Melinda and their 4 boys, Earl, age 8, Clifford, age 6, Troy, age 4, Perry, age 2, to Oklahoma to work. Several families had either moved or went west temporarily to earn money on the flat plains of western Oklahoma. How the Harnesses traveled there from Bear Creek is unknown, but most likely they went with someone who was going there in a vehicle, such as a truck. The family would ride in the truck bed with straw, hay, and sleep there at night as well. The boys were too young to be much help doing farming or harvesting, so it fell upon the parents to do most of the work. Arrangements had been made for the Harness family to stay in housing provided them by a landowner who employed them to help with farming. A milk cow was also provided, who gave birth to a heifer calf the morning that Melinda Harness gave birth to her first daughter. She had traveled with her husband and 4 boys while carrying a baby to Carnegie, Oklahoma, in the back of a truck. That left Riley with only small children to help him to work on the farm as Melinda recovered and cared for the little girl for a few days. John Martin Harness, the son of Mart Harness, who was the older brother of Billy Harness, was an uncle to Riley. All the family called him Uncle John. He was 39 years old at the time, and he was the helper that Riley needed. Uncle John never married, and without that arrangement, I'm sure Riley would have never taken his family to Oklahoma. Uncle John was plowing in the field when his nephew Clifford Harness went to tell him, "We've got a new heifer calf and new heifer baby." It was a story John loved to talk about, of his nephew having a heifer sister. Melinda gave birth to a red-headed girl, who they named Veda Joe Harness. When Earl, who was the oldest boy at 8 years old, knew that another mouth had to be fed, he believed that it was not going to help the family get ahead. So he decided to protest the new baby by not looking at her the first day. He thought that a girl couldn't do the work of a boy, and she would never measure up to the others, but the next day he took a look at her, and she made him change his mind. Her red hair and complexion favored his, and for the remainder of their lives they shared a bond of closeness. Also, she showed herself to be as good as any boy at working. On their first trip to Oklahoma, Riley went to work farming, but near Tulsa and Oklahoma City, there was an oil boom going on. In time, the largest production of oil in the world would start from a wildcat well near the town of Seminole, Oklahoma. The gusher and era of oil fields moved oil reserves from scarcity to surplus, causing tens of thousands of jobs. However, the oil business did nothing for the depressed markets of farm products, and Riley Harness stayed with farming and never chased after the big money of progress. The flat land of western Oklahoma had a drier and hotter climate than the bottom land on Bear Creek. There were no hills and few trees. The creeks ran brown, and the dust swirled about from the wind until it rained, and then it was mud. There were few rocks for boys to throw and fewer animals to hunt. The rabbits were bigger. Mark Twain had named them well, jackass rabbits. But the Harness boys were mostly too young to notice the contrast between Arkansas and Oklahoma. With the hills in their blood, nothing else would ever seem to be home. Out farther in western Oklahoma, another family settled that would someday intersect with the Harness family. Near the panhandle of Oklahoma was the small town of Gage. When spectators came to drill for oil, one hit an artesian well, and water gushed to the surface. The family of Marie Crowder and the family of William Tell Oates came to Gage, where the two married after meeting in school. To them was born a son, Gerald Oates, who moved to Oregon as a young man. Years later, his daughter Darla married a harness boy and then moved back to the Ozark Hills. It was an Okie-Arkie connection that was 3 generations in the making. The Riley Harness family returned to the Ozarks and to Searcy County in the late fall of 1927. The corn in the fields could wait to be picked if the wildlife didn't eat too much. The sorghum cane was ready after frost to be cut and worked into molasses when time permitted. Some say the molasses was better when the cane was drier. Hogs needed to be killed and put up first. Then ears of corn were picked and hauled in with a mule-drawn wagon or sled and then stored in the corn crib of the barn. Billy Harness had kept the farm running, but it was hard for one man to do the chores at age 68. With the coming of winter in the new year of 1928, the Harness family was snug in their cabin on Bear Creek, where 11 souls shared the small space. Winter chores of milking the cow, tending hogs and chickens, and feeding livestock was a daily task. Cutting firewood for cooking and keeping the fireplace hot took time and energy, but when weather permitted, some plowing was done, and rocks were removed from the field. The field rocks were worked into a fence or used to fill up holes in ditches. Sunday was a day to do only necessary work and to gather with family or church to worship. It also gave the children some free time to explore and be creative. Grandma Jenny had instilled in her children the importance of keeping Sunday as a time of observance to God. The spring of 1928, Riley planted his crops and helped his father Billy plant the portion that was his. They each had a section that they considered theirs, and Riley, Melinda, and children would plant helping both men. Preparing the soil and planting by hand took a lot of time and hard work. While larger farms were using teams of animals or tractors to pull plows and planters, the Harnesses were limited to a couple of mules and manual labor. With 4 growing boys, Riley looked forward to the day when they could physically do more work. In other parts of the world in 1928, one of the advancements that came from having electricity was the television. In New York City, the first TV station broadcast began. Early televisions fluttered, and the picture was hard to watch, but Bell Labs invented a device that made the picture hold steady. George Eastman that same year showed the first color motion pictures in the U.S., and a Scottish inventor demonstrated color TV. Additionally, a transatlantic TV image was made and received. In time, the ability of sending both sound and picture images transformed communications and opened a world of electronic advancements that continue to this day. Walt Disney released Steamboat Willie starring Mickey Mouse, which premiered in New York City the same year. It was the first successful sound-synchronized cartoon animation. The days of silent movies would soon be outdated. Wall Street liked all the progress and newness of modern ideas and saw stock prices climb wildly as speculation, and easy loans made investors take unprecedented risk. It was the peak of the Roaring '20s, and folks thought it would only get better with time. Up on the mountain, where Giles and Jody Turney farmed at Atlas, little by little they were able to save some money and put it away. Giles had a small building next to his house, where he had a rustic and simple store to supply the neighborhood with basic needs. The grandson, Earl Harness, remembers his grandpa having things like salt, sugar, coffee beans, flour, and such. He also had a jar with some hard candy. Getting an occasional stick of candy was larrapin. Giles made a couple of cents here and a nickel there, allowing him to add to his savings, which he hid in a can inside his store. One day, Giles discovered that his can had been robbed of nearly $100. Unlike most folks, he never told anyone, but kept quiet and watched for evidence. One day, a neighbor fellow came to his little store, and in conversation, he asked Giles, "Did you ever find your money?" He had not told a soul about it. Replying, he said, "Not until now." The fellow denied any knowledge of the crime and left the store. However, Giles followed the man to his house and went in and sat down and told him that he would not leave till he got his money back. Again, the man denied any wrongdoing, but Giles persisted until the man confessed and gave it back. I suppose the incident caused Giles to put away a savings of $600 in the bank at Marshall. This was just before the Great Depression, when banks would fail. In the end, Giles only received a fraction of his money and referred to it as his little 600. He never trusted banks for the remainder of his life with his money. In the long run, the big safe at the bank was not as safe as his money can. What a man can watch with his own eye is more secure than what others promise to watch for you. Reflection. Having children during times of hardship and marginal income is not poor planning. Large families were common before parental planning began. God's Word declares that children are a blessing, and that is best understood by those who live to see their children's children. Few, if any, are the elderly who regret having many children. Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from Him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. Psalm 127:3-5.